My name is Christian. I'm the Director of the Centre for Social Justice. It's a great privilege to welcome you to the National Liberal Club this morning for what I think is an important moment in the life of the Centre for Social Justice, but also, I hope, for the political debate in our country. So thank you for being here. I'll speak for a few minutes. You'll also hear from our Director of Policy, Alex Burghardt, who will give you a summary, an overview of some of what we've been doing over the last 2 years. And then we have a prestigious panel, a cross-party panel, really importantly, of, in my view, the most serious thinkers in their respective political parties in Westminster. And it's a great privilege to have you with us. Thank you for giving us your time and for sharing a platform and for proving, actually, that on some of the biggest issues facing us in this time, that the political parties can come together and have a discussion and dialogue. It's really encouraging to see you here. Thank you. 18 months ago, the Centre for Social Justice set out on quite a remarkable task. And that was to go all over this country with partners, supporters, friends, to have a serious look again at some of the things that hold Britain back, some of the toughest social problems facing the UK, and most importantly, what we can do constructively to turn things around and turn lives around. We formed partnerships with many corporate organisations, many trusts, many foundations to make that work possible, and I want to thank them today for all of their support. We spent time with charities. We spent time with people who are working every day, often unthanked, rarely seen, rarely rewarded, who are doing the most remarkable work to keep our country moving in the right direction and to tackle poverty. We left Westminster, and that was a really important part of this story. We wanted to understand the dimensions behind UK poverty and disadvantage. What was driving it? Why in certain communities we were finding entrenched levels of breakdown and social injustice. And we wanted to look at the practical solutions we could find in public policy terms to start to turn that around. We'd done this before, Breakthrough Britain, which was commissioned by David Cameron in 2005 as an independent process to challenge the Conservative Party and what they would do if they were serious about social breakdown and tackling it. We thought we would do it again, and we're presenting it to all political parties, as you're seeing today, as a piece of work that I think will inform them going into the next election. It has been an incredible process. We have been covering more than 50,000 miles as a team over the last 18 months. We've been on 1,000 visits around the UK. We've been working with 2,000 experts, more than 150 hearings, more than 6,000 people polled through YouGov. And at the heart of that process has been 350 charities that have shaped all that we've done. And this is their work as much as ours. So what we are presenting today isn't a theoretical pitch. It is not a dream or a vision that we have produced, buried in our office in Westminster. We have been all over this country, and we are coming back to you today to say, here's what we've found. Here are the views of the people that know what they're talking about and who make a difference. We've been all over the UK. For me, in the last few months, that's been Hull, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Somerset, Brighton, Cardiff, Kent, Manchester, Birmingham, Bradford, many more others, Loughborough. We have been the length and breadth of the UK. We're publishing 192 ideas today across 6 themes, and Alex will be in a minute telling you about those and walking you through them. But it all amounts to a big challenge to the panel, to their parties. It's a constructive effort to say, we know we share the same goals, to tackle poverty, to reverse social breakdown. Here is our contribution for how we might get there. And it really matters. And that these people really matter, particularly in this election year. Because with growth returning to the country, we're at a crossroads. Do we take the direction that ends up making perhaps some of the mistakes of the past, and we end up leaving people behind, watching a recovery that impacts most but not all? Or do we find a way of bringing everybody into our economy and into our society to improve their lives and enable them to play a part? For us, tackling poverty is so much more than about changing spreadsheets and whiteboard strategies. It's about changing lives and working with people who know exactly how to do that. We agree with that. As a response, the political parties share that goal, and today is our contribution to how we might start to to move in that direction. I'm delighted to hand over to Alex Burghardt, who's our Director of Policy, who's managed this process remarkably. Alex is going to talk you through some of the highlights. You won't hear, thankfully, please know 192 of the ideas. We will give you the best of them. And then we're going to hand straight over to him from the political parties. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all you've given to this process. And for us, the work starts here, because it's about influencing, it's about a constructive discussion ahead of the election, about how you put social justice at the heart of political planning. So thank you, and over to Alex.
Good morning, everyone. Anyone who knows work with Christian will know what an extremely committed, caring, sensitive, and deeply unreasonable man he is. Yesterday, when we were discussing this event, he said, I'll do some introductory comments, and then maybe you can summarise the past 2 years' work in 8 or 9 minutes. So here it goes. All investigations of poverty begin, I think, with human stories. Begins with stories of those who have seen poverty and those who have experienced it. Mine, for what it is worth, is the story of my dad, the Tottenham grammar school boy who went on to be the head teacher of a dockside primary school in Southampton, where he always told me it was not unusual for 5-year-old children to arrive, still in nappies, unable to speak, unaware of what their names were. You will all be aware of hundreds of such stories. It's why you're in the room. And over the past 2 years, we have heard hundreds, maybe thousands, of similar stories. Those stories have inspired us, they've scared us, and they've driven us to come up with the solutions to those people's problems that we present to you in the reports that you'll find here today. I always think of Emma, the 14-year-old girl who's in foster care, who hadn't been given a hot meal for 3 years. The community we visited, where unemployment was set in 3 generations, according to the charities who work there, but local firms were flying employees in from Portugal because they said they couldn't find people with basic skills in the area. The judge who had taken 14 children into care over 15 years from the same mother, and the children so neglected by their parents that their teeth had rotted. These are difficult things to hear, and they are difficult things to say, but they must be said and they must be heard so that we can ask the question of whether we are happy to live in a society in which such things happen. Because if we are not, we must ask the question of what we are going to do about it. Today we set out some of the ways in which we can do something about it, in which we can start to build the sort of society in which we are happy to live. So, in turn, we've looked at what we call 5 pathways to poverty: family breakdown, worklessness, addiction, educational failure, serious personal debt. Because wherever you find these problems, wherever you find one of these problems, you tend to find 2, you tend to find 3, 4, and so on. And then if you create a society in which they are removed, well, there is just less space for poverty to operate in. So we set a challenge for the next government to do something to eliminate these pathways to poverty, to help build a better society. First, on family. We want to set the next government the challenge of being the first in history to permanently reduce family breakdown. There are currently 1 million children growing up in our society who don't see their father. There are communities that we've been to where 75% of children are growing up without a dad at home. This is not right. And so we're asking that a new network, family hubs, be set up, working on building on the Shore Start model, so that everybody who lives in that area will know that there's places they can go to, not just do things like birth registration and get early years support, but also places they can go when their relationships are in trouble, to get the sort of excellent relationship support that we've seen at work in the United States, which has been successful in reducing family breakdown. On worklessness, we have to ask whether it's right that over 1 million children are growing up in homes where nobody works. And because we know that the first step that a young person makes into employment is one of the most important, we are calling for earlier intervention. We're saying we've seen projects in the East End of London, a project called Think Forward, which targets those children who are most likely to become NEET, most likely to be not in education, employment or training. After 5 years of running, that project has successfully seen its first graduates, 95% of its first graduates, go into employment, education or training. Let's take projects like that to all the private parts of the country so that we can give the most disadvantaged young people the start they need. But we also need a UCA-style clearing system, so that hurdle between school and employment is more easily made. And for those young people who have tried to enter the job market and have struggled, we need more intensive support, so that instead of being on benefits, they're employed by charities and social enterprises who pay them in return for receiving the services they need to make sure that they can overcome their barriers to work. These, on addiction, perhaps one of the most serious, unconfronted social issues in our society. 300,000 heroin addicts, over 1 million people dependent on alcohol, 35,000 people in prison because of their addiction, 40,000 children in care because of their parents' addiction. This is a problem that can be solved. We have seen it in the excellent residential rehab centres who we visited, the excellent practitioners who we have spoken to. And that's why we're calling for a new treatment tax of 1p on the price of on every unit sold off licence. The equivalent of about 7 or 8p on a bottle of wine. Because that money, as we've shown, can fund a new generation of residential rehab, which will effectively eliminate addiction over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. On education, we've seen wonderful work being done in some parts of the system, but we've also seen schools and communities where success has passed them by. And that's why we've set up, we want to see initiatives and incentives for the best academy chains, the best head teachers, and the best teachers to move into the areas that need them most. We need to spread success around the system. On debt, we know that there are over 8 million people in our country who struggle with serious personal debt. We know the harm that this can do to mental health, harm that this can do to relationships. We've met families who have lost loved ones to suicide because of the terrible trauma of dealing with unmanageable debt. And that's why we're calling for a new generation of community banks that build on the best successes of the most experienced credit unions, that can successfully go out there and compete with high-cost lenders and give families who are struggling to find the money for a broken washing machine or a broken boiler, give them that money at lower rates of interest that they can afford to pay back so they don't get trapped in a debt spiral. Lastly, but by no means least, in the voluntary sector, we have seen a wonderful model in the US, Social Innovation Fund, that has successfully started giving money to bright new ideas. We're quite good at supporting some charities in this country, but they tend to be charities who've already proven themselves, who already have a successful model. This will be a fund to breathe new life into new ideas. And by government seizing £400 million worth of dormant insurance claims, we can create that new generation of great ideas. These are just 6 ideas out of 192. But if the total of this research can be summarised in one word, it is hope. Because we believe that there are solutions to these social problems, that they are not intractable, that they are not too difficult for politics, not too difficult for society, that the people who suffer by them can be set free to enjoy all the things that the rest of us can so often take for granted. Achieving these changes is about building what Oliver once called the neighbourly society, what Morris and John have called the good society. Society in which people are free to make their own choices and take responsibility for those choices, but in which government and community have an essential duty to offer help to those who need it and to help them make positive decisions. This is a society of the second chance, where we can help to pick people up wherever and whenever they fall. If we build that society, then we can start to change the stories of those most in need. We can help to build a society in which we are all happy to live. Thanks very much.
So much, Alex. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, thank you very much, Christian as well, and everyone who's here. Jean Monnet, who was one of the founders of the European Union, said there are two types of people in politics. There are the people who want to be something, and there are people who want to do something. And I think in our array here, an incredibly glittering array of parliamentarians here, and John Curtis, who has a message for us, and not only are there 50 years of parliamentary experience represented in 4 people, but I think every single one of them absolutely fits the category of they are here to do something. They're living the sacrificial life that is politics to do something. And I'm going to introduce them just before they speak. So I'll firstly introduce Oliver. We do all stand on the shoulders of giants, and there is no doubt that Oliver is a towering figure in the Conservative Party. He's been Grand Vizier of Conservative policy since 2005. He's recently been promoted, and it's a huge honour for us to have him speak here. 10 years ago, he was breaking new ground in the Conservative Party by talking about jamming a crowbar into the conveyor belt to crime, tackling the root causes. It's a huge resonance with our work, and he's been a very good friend of ours. In particular, the first Breakthrough Britain report, he ensured its messages before the election, after the election, have been at the forefront of Conservative policies. He's going to speak for a few minutes now on the Conservative approach to social justice. Thank you, Oliver.
Thanks very much. I see from the agenda that I was meant to speak about what social justice is. I have absolutely no intention of launching into some kind of definitional exercise. Anybody who doesn't recognise social justice, or more particularly social injustice when they see it, wouldn't be in this room anyhow. And I don't think, as to the panellists, or indeed across the political spectrum, there is really any argument about the things that we're trying to remedy. I'm therefore going to concentrate on the question that our first 2 speakers concentrate on, which is what the hell we do about it. I should say I'm delighted to be here at the CSJ. I was enrolled with Ian at the very beginning when it was first founded, and as you rightly say, in bringing him and his colleagues into the policy review that led to Breakdown Britain and Breakthrough Britain, which are seminal texts. And it's, I think, proved a remarkably robust analysis. The identification of the particular crucial elements of social justice that trap people and prevent them from being part of the mainstream that was present in Breakdown Britain and beyond Breakdown Britain, and still dominates the thinking of these new rather awesome 192 recommendations, which I hasten to add I haven't yet read. It's robust, I think, because it's simply true to life. As we've worked at things like the Troubled Families Programme and drug and alcohol recovery programs that Steve and others in the current government have been pressing forwards, over and over again, one gets the sense that the 5 great traps that were originally identified by that work are still present, and that they still constitute the main reasons why some people in our society are not able to be part of the mainstream. So the objective to overcome those 5 obstacles is the first piece of clarity that one requires. Then of course one gets the really difficult bit. What do you do about them? I want to echo what's been said earlier. I think my faith in theory before these last 4 years is now reinforced by practical experience of those years. The truth is that these problems, while they are fantastically difficult for the people and the families that are in the traps that are described, are not ultimately irresolvable. We can make real progress. And I think that's an extraordinarily important thing to fasten onto. I think there is, if we're honest, has been over the past 20, 30, 40 years, present in our society and our culture, a tendency to think from time to time, or at least half to think, or at least to fear, that there's some group of people somewhere that are unrescuable. Now, rescue is a fantastically difficult thing, and I'm not trying to come before you with a naive view that one wanders in with a magic wand and waves it and all is well. Very far from it. But it is doable. The inspiring cases are not a few, there are many. There are many, many, many people who escape from these traps and flourish and grow. And we can help people to reach the acceleration point at which they emerge. And I just want to tell you a tiny bit about 2 or 3 of the things we've been doing that I think illustrate that. I remember being told by Michael Howard some years ago that when he became Home Secretary, there was a meeting at the Home Office, presided over by the then Permanent Secretary, who had a graph which showed the inexorable rise of crime in Britain since, I can't remember, the 30s or the 50s or something. And the Permanent Secretary said, Home Secretary, you have a job to do. And looking at this graph, Michael thought that sounded right. And the Permanent Secretary said, the Home Secretary, your job is to make this graph acceptable to British people. And Michael thought to himself, that doesn't sound like the right answer. And I felt somewhat the same when we began to try to shift the consensus on what drug and alcohol programs were about. Because 4 years ago when we arrived on the scene, we discovered that very widespread across the very large number of people who were earnestly trying to do good things was the idea that somehow it wasn't resolvable. Recovery wasn't possible. The best you could hope for was safety and maintenance. But we didn't believe that, we don't believe that, and now I think I can tell you definitively it isn't true. We have not created a revolution, we have not changed the scene overnight beyond all recognition. There are still far, far too many of our fellow citizens caught in serious drug dependency, for example. But the truth is we have begun to change the pattern. Recovery has now, I think, pretty widely been understood as the goal, that nothing else will ultimately do. And although the advance is small, it's had a near miraculous effect, which is that the proportion of those who are stuck in or trapped in a vortex of usually a cocktail of multiplicity of drugs, including heroin and crack cocaine, and who therefore almost inevitably live a life of crime and almost inevitably are excluded from employment, jobs. The proportion of people in that position has slightly declined, because the rate at which we are enabling people to emerge from that situation very slightly exceeds the rate at which people get into it. And that is an incredibly important turning point in our society. It is doable. want to take is out of the Troubled Families programme that I mentioned a moment or two ago. Everybody's known for a very long time that these things come together, and indeed that was part of the point of the original analysis of breakdown. But it doesn't all come in the same patterns and shapes, but broadly it gets concentrated. And a family, all too typically, will have drug and alcohol problems, chaotic lifestyle, family breakdown, perennial worthlessness, criminality, a whole series of issues. And we've all known for a very long time that different people across a wide range of agencies have been intervening to try to do something. And we've also known for a very long time that they frequently overlapped and didn't talk to one another. And we've also known for a very long time this is incredibly expensive for the taxpayer, sometimes costing as much as £100,000 a family a year. And we decided to do something about that. And the work that Louise Casey has done in bringing together across the whole group teams who actually identify the families concerned and identify the agencies and people that were working with them and work out how they could actually work consistently and effectively so there's one person taking the lead in trying to help that family improve their circumstances. Just that very simple change has proved extraordinarily effective. And we're beginning to see now, at last, some of those families with reducing criminality, reducing truancy, reducing worthlessness. This is a real change, just by organising better. No extra money, no revolutionary approaches. But I give you this, because I will stop talking now, but I give those two small examples which have ricochet effects across our society. And what they give me is faith that if we keep at this, we can make this change. Thank you.
I'm Samantha Carroll. I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, forgive me, but I head up all family work at the CSJ, so I'm absolutely delighted that you have made so much progress with families. And on that note, I'm also very pleased to introduce Steve Webb, because Steve has really broken new ground within his own party, putting children, families, and their importance on the Liberal Democrat agenda. 10 years ago, he wrote an extremely influential essay for the Orange Book. And I'm delighted to hear he's now in charge of family stability, which I hope you'll be seeing a lot of us coming to talk to you about. Actually, got some fantastic ideas on that front, as you may already know. But I think it would be wrong not to say that Steve's also been an extremely successful in reforming Minister of State for Pensions, who's been grappling with the issues of poverty throughout a really long and distinguished career before coming into politics. So just before I invite him to come up and speak, I must say, Steve will have to leave. There's a car turning up for him and he will just have to go. So do forgive me if he has to leave before everybody else, perhaps about 10:15. So Steve, thank you very much.
Samantha, thank you very much, and thank you for that generous introduction. As Samantha says, I'm a minister at the DWP, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Centre for Social Justice. It has been quite a period of 4 years. It's been a privilege to work alongside Ian Smith and Philippa Stroud and many others who've been very influenced and who have influenced and shaped what the CSJ has had to say. And I thought what Alex had to say was very inspiring, so thank you for that and for the chance to think out loud for a few minutes. It's interesting, you have these kind of three-party panels, and certainly in the 12 months running up to a general election, there's always that risk of trying to find difference where it doesn't exist, trying to stress, my idea is better than your ideas and so on. And of course, we differ on things, but there is a huge amount of common ground. And I don't think I could object to anything that I've just heard my colleague Oliver Letwin say about the things that have been achieved. But I thought I would just in a few minutes try and communicate what a liberal understanding of social justice actually is. And I was very encouraged that Alex used the phrase that the CSJ's approach and conclusions are about hope. Because for me, liberalism is fundamentally a hope-filled political philosophy. If you trust people, if you believe in people, you have to have hope at the heart of that. If you despair, in the potential for people, then you wouldn't be a Liberal. And I think Oliver's point that we have concluded, that you have concluded, that no one should be written off is at the heart of liberalism for me. And we all have our slogans, and they play bingo at Prime Minister's Question Time, so you can get 5 points for the government's long-term economic plan. If you hear a Liberal Democrat say, not only do you get the strong economy you might expect from our blue friends, but the fair society you might want from our red friends, you get 15 points for that. But there is a missing bit of that phrase. Yes, we're in favour of a strong economy and a fair society, but the bit that gets cut off is so that everyone can get on in life. And the challenge for us as Liberals is to say a just society is one where how you get on in life has nothing to do with what is printed on your birth certificate, where you were born, who your parents were, how many names are on the birth certificate as parents. A really just society for a Liberal is one where you can not guess how a child is going to do in life based on that information. And that's a huge challenge, isn't it? How far are we away from that goal? But it must be where we aim at. Now, there are brands of liberalism, and these hallowed halls, I hesitate to step too far down this route, but people distinguish social liberals and economic liberals. And it's not the most helpful distinction, but I would say an economic liberal doesn't really trust governments, and a social liberal also doesn't really trust markets. To presume that governments know the answers or markets will deliver the answers. And I guess where I come from as a social liberal is to say, I don't presume either is the answer. I absolutely believe in the power of government to do good. I absolutely believe that markets will sometimes deliver the best outcome, but I don't worship either. And let me just give you an example of that from the pension sphere. So, a very topical example. Until recently, you save for a pension, and the presumption was that because money is difficult and financial products are difficult, and not many people know much about it, we have to nanny people and require them to turn their pension into an annuity. And essentially the socialist view was, some people might get this wrong, so we have to protect them by making them do something. And of course, in reality, the very rich are exempt from that because the very rich had choices. But the bulk of people, because there was a risk they might get it wrong, had to be looked after. And what this government has done this year is reverse the burden of proof. And has said, no, we actually think that at the point of retirement, the individual is best placed to know what is in their interest. Do they want money up front while they're fit and well, rather than spreading a pot over their retirement? Do they want to put some money aside for inheritance for their children? Do they want to plan for long-term care? Everyone is different. And fundamental liberal insight, perhaps not that shockingly, is to say, one-size-fits-all just doesn't work. But it isn't just to abandon people, to cut people free and to leave them to their own devices. It's to say, but we will equip people to make good choices. That's why at the moment we are, sweating blood wouldn't understate it, I think, to get a guarantee, a guidance guarantee in place for next April, so that yes, we give people freedom, but we equip them to make good use of that freedom. And that, I think, is the liberal balance, the small L liberal. I think Oliver would have no objection with me using that phrase. So, enabling people to get on in life, let me give you just a brief example from the other end of the age spectrum. What's happening this month, this week, for children in primary schools. Now, when we said we wanted free school meals for primary school, infant school children to go from just those on certain benefits to all infant school children, some people said, oh, that's a waste of money, why are you paying for the free school meals for the middle classes and so on. But actually, it's quite clear that, first of all, many poor children weren't getting the help that they needed through free school meals. And all children are benefiting, because we know that we've already piloted these things, from things like improved nutrition. So we know, for example, that I think there's some starting statistic that if you take the average school lunchbox, 1% are of adequate nutritional standard. So actually, and that's a case where provision just for the poor not only misses some of the poor, but actually fails us all. So sometimes, yes, the state's right to step in to make sure we have universal provision of decent standard, and the signs are that will enable people to get on in life. And crucially, whilst I absolutely welcome the work done for 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds to prevent them becoming NEETs, the seeds, as we know, start much, much earlier. And that's why Nick Clegg has been so focused on social mobility. I mean, to my immense frustration as Pensions Minister, Nick is very interested in the other end of the age scale, and rightly so. Because if we don't get things right at the start, then we're sowing the seeds of problems later on. So a liberal approach to social justice starts right at the very beginning, because that's when you get most bang for your buck, that's when we shape people. So I had thought that when we were doing this, it would be the day after the publication of the Lib Dem Pre-Manifesto. It's now 4 days before the publication of the Lib Dem Pre-Manifesto. So the long list, about 193 brilliant policies, will have to wait till next week. But simply to say, I suspect that there is far more that unites us on this panel than divides us. I do apologise, I'm rushing off after we've heard all our speakers. Funnily enough, to visit a nursery in Colchester where from this September 40% of disadvantaged 2-year-olds, the most 40% of disadvantaged 2-year-olds, will get 15 hours of free provision for the first time, embodying just the sorts of things I've been talking about today. So I very much look forward to regular meetings with the CSJ in my new additional role, though my diary is very busy for the next 6 months. But I welcome the fact that from its inception, CSJ has been about tackling causes, and in a sense, if you deliver on what you want, if we tackle the issues you have raised, then the liberal vision of a good society and a just society where what's on your birth certificate doesn't affect your outcomes would be an awful lot in the area. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's very exciting. We now have a video link from John Cruddas, who's the Dagenham and Rainham MP, as many of you will know. Given his constituency, it's clear that on a daily basis he is grappling with some most acute deprivation in the country. So we are delighted that he has a leading role in the Labour policy review, because he really does know what he's up against. And he's not trying to make it palatable, as Always says we mustn't. But I'm over to the technical people to make John appear on the screen.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Cruddas. I'm MP for Dagenham and Rainham in East London, but I'm also overseeing Labour's policy review. And for many years, personally since about 2007, but also in terms of Labour's policy review for the last few years, we've been keeping a very close eye on what's happening over at the CSJ. And we've been studying the reports through this summer, and we very welcome to return to some of the issues that you worked across from 2007 in terms of long-term social policy reform, prevention, questions of devolution of services, reconfiguring services around families and individuals, what it means in terms of long-term budget setting, questions of debt, human well-being. So it's a real rich theme of work that we've been studying and working alongside you for many years, and I look forward to doing so in the future as well. Over the last 10 years, the CSJ has contributed enormously to modern social policy, rethinking social policy in this country. They have now got a body of work which will endure. As we see through this summer and culminating today, more contributions which are based on the same preoccupations of the last 10 years. I wish I could be with you this morning, but I can't. I'm afraid I have to be out of the country. But I hope you have a very good, constructive day. I'm sure you will, and look forward to reading the conclusions of the subsequent reports.
Thank you very much, John. I've been told by our amazing events coordinator, Lucy Moore, that I cannot be seen from the back, so I'm now standing so you can see what I look like. I'm not just a disembodied voice. I'm not here by video link, I am actually here in person. And I want to just introduce now our last speaker, Lord Glasman, Maurice Glasman. Maurice was introduced to the House of Lords in 2011, as many of you will know, and I would say he is the philosopher king of the Labour Party. With his blue Labour articulation, he's pulling Labour towards a new vision for families, communities, and for social action by really reminding them of their roots before the rise of the welfare state. And I think the thing that shines through from Maurice, we had him at a Labour Party conference, he was in conversation with Christian in an evening. Nobody wanted to leave the room. They loved it, the integrity, the passion, the deep thinking. So we are absolutely delighted that you can be with us today, Maurice. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. I can assure you that that's never happened in my social life, but people never wanted to leave the room. And that's the thing with, I always think about social justice, I'm very influenced by Hayek. Hayek always says, you put the word social before any word, following word, but it turned it into the opposite. So, for example, if you hear the word social democracy, you'll know that you won't get democracy, and it won't be, and it would be basically be state administration of the social market that lead to the destruction of the market. Now, I do want to say to social justice, obviously he said that when you hear the word social justice, you must be very suspicious, because it will undermine justice and it won't be social. But I do want to say to your centre that you've actually disproved my it, which is quite a remarkable thing to do. Precisely because you have approached this through, in a way that you talked about institutions and families and places that were neither, as I think Steve correctly said, they were neither dominated by the state nor the market. And this is where I want to go today in relation to what we're doing in the Labour Party policy review. I really think, I just want to reiterate what John Potter said. You have given us a lot of space. You've allowed us to develop a set of ideas that I don't think were possible to develop before. I think that New Labour was defined by an absolute reliance on either the state or the market, that those were the two instruments that we worked with. This was either going to be dealt with by a policy, this was going to be dealt with in a managerial sense, or this was going to be dealt with through privatisation or through bringing the market into to make things more efficient. And I think that the consensus that we've got is that that's over. And so the limits of the big society should not lead us to reject the social or society, but in fact to make it stronger. So what we did in the policy review in relation to the conception of social justice was we built it around three concepts that we thought were absolutely foundational to building a society. Those were family, place and work. So everything that we've looked at, it's how it relates to strengthening family, restoring a sense of place, because remember both the state and the market actually despise place, because what they want is just procedures, fair procedures. So that's the complication with the liberal conception of social justice, which I want to talk about rather than argue about, which is that people are from places. They do come from relationships. So there's a tendency in liberalism not to value relationships and not to appreciate inequalities of power. And though to strengthen those so that liberty involves, I think, recognising that a flourishing life is embedded in relationships, and also that there has to be a greater equality of power, that there has to be a balance of power. And I think that's essential. So we build it around family, place and work. So what I really want to do, and I know that you've got to go, is to honour the work that the Centre for Social Justice does, and to look at where we need to go now. Certainly from Labour's point of view, in terms to make this more real, and in terms of building on the work that you've done. So I come here to praise Caesar, so to speak, and certainly to acknowledge you. I was always really struck that for a socialist party like mine to react so strongly when people started to talk about social or society, I always felt one of the most peculiar experiences. And would indicate how far that we've become wedded to an exclusively state approach. And I really just want to look very briefly at how we're moving away from that and how building on the work that you're doing. So obviously the concept that we're developing is to try to build incentives to virtue. Try to the possibilities of being good don't come naturally. I think that if we're going to talking about which Alex did, unpalatable things, I think if you look at the story that we've known about for so long but has broken this loop in relation to Rotherham, everything is present about the disintegration and degradation of human life. And everything is present about the inability to talk about that openly and plainly. And I think that it's vital that we bear witness to the lack of the degradation of those girls surrounded by power that did not protect them and lacking relationships. This is the point. They absolutely lacked any relationships of integrity, of faithfulness. care, of compassion, of love, that could protect them in those circumstances. And that's where we have to move to, is how to conceptualise that. So you see that all the procedures can be there in relation to the state, but unless there's interests, unless there's some relationship, and where, I think about it a lot. So when we're talking about place, we're also talking about the institutions that are embedded in place. And those place institutions, I think it's legitimate to ask where the church was in this story, where the unions were in this story, where were the civic institutions that upheld the fundamental dignity of the person. So I think that we need now to move to a change in essential statecraft, where we look at the institutions required, where I think, particularly following Steve's point, I think we have to look, I think that there is a consensus building that on the limits of the state, but I think there's also limits of the market have to be firmly understood, and that the pressure of the marketplace is to generate vice. So when we talk about incentives to virtue, in the policy review, what we are also recognising is that an exclusive concern with money, selfishness and career is not good. There has to be a counterbalance to that, and that above all, the market has a tendency to turn human beings and their natural environment into a commodity. And I think it's important to say that the work you've done on character, the work you've done on faithfulness indicates that human beings are not commodities. One of the great things about working with faith communities, particularly in relation to the environment and to nature, is that they don't believe that the free market spontaneously created the world, at least that there was something sort of prior to that. There is a duty to care for. But those are the sort of ways that we need to go. So in relation to debt, we just have to acknowledge what the circumstances are, but it is still the case that the banks are essentially printing money, but let's say they nominally borrow at 3%. I mean, it was only last year that the banks lent to the money shop at 7%, and that the money shop is lending to poor people at 5,500%. Where's the incentives? So the burdens of the crash have been overwhelmingly carried by the poor. And so we need to, when we talk about regional banks, it's not just, I think we've got to talk about the endowment of local banks, of regional banks, as part of the, so we think that perhaps 10% of the bailout should be used to constitute an alternative banking system that will support the credit unions, for example. I've got the 1 minute, so I will end with just two concepts, vocation and leadership, that we need to move towards. Christian, I think when we're looking at this stage, local institutions that create some form of virtue that can resist, that can strengthen relationships and resist the domination of either the state or the market, but also to look at big changes in the educational system so that we can actually work, that people know what they're doing, and the respect for good work is part of the big cultural change that we need. And that in the end, we have to have faith, I agree, and some hope in something that we've neglected, which is politics. But by giving people power, the people need more power to shape their lives, but they can only do that together. I'll end, one of my worst occasions in politics was talking to a previous Labour Party leader who said to me, what do you mean by leadership? What is a leader? And I said, well, a leader is someone with followers. We haven't really got over that one yet. But it's important, that's the part of the story about politics, relationships, adding to the quality of the life. So I really want to honour your work. I think that you've done wonderful work.